Come to the Senate. The issue of differing standards and codes across the country has come up already, and it makes a lot of sense to try to harmonize these standards so that goods can flow across provincial borders. But the prior question is how these standards and codes came up in the first place and how any future standards and codes are developed. Often they're developed by officials, in their different ministries at the provincial or federal level, and that's why, in part, we have the problem of inconsistency. What do you see, Minister, as the role for Canada's standards development organizations to play a bigger role in the development of standards and codes that can be incorporated into what's called the national standards system of this country, and then incorporated by reference into the regulations of any new thing that needs to be regulated, rather than have officials regularly and routinely develop the regulations themselves?
I think it's a very good point and a very good idea. What I will, though, say to everyone here is the approach right now, the drive to remove internal barriers to trade and to labor mobility, certainly in many areas is about harmonization. But it is also and even principally about mutual recognition. That's the approach that Australia took that is shown to work. It's an approach that has the virtue of being often swifter than harmonization. And I think it's an approach that has the virtue of being about true nation building. I really like the way that Premier Houston of Nova Scotia talks about mutual recognition. He says it's about trusting each other. And that's why I used some specific examples in my opening remarks. They weren't just boilerplate. I wrote my opening remarks myself because I think part of internal trade is really about saying, if you feel safe eating a steak in Calgary, if you trust the province of Alberta to be sure you're not going to be poisoned by eating that steak, why should it have to go through additional testing? Why should it have to jump that steak, metaphorically have to jump through additional hoops for me to be able to eat that same steak in Toronto? The same applies to labor mobility. If a nurse can work and treat you in Halifax and you trust her to be fully qualified, why shouldn't she be able to treat you in Saskatoon? Why should she have to jump through additional hoops? And so really, I appreciate the point about harmonization, and it's a very good idea. But I would just like to really emphasize the point that the very important approach that the provinces have led with, that the federal government is recognizing and supporting, is mutual recognition, trusting each other to get it right, and not having to duplicate processes.
Mutual recognition is part and parcel of the standard system, and it includes conformity assessment, of course, which is very essential to recognizing the standards of different jurisdictions. The problem with incorporating by reference standards developed outside of the government system, as I see it, is one that has to do with the Statutory Instruments Act, which is very strict on what can be incorporated. And more importantly, it's a problem of culture within bureaucracies that have a tendency to want to develop regulations internally by themselves rather than looking to, if I can put it this way, the expert community that already exists across Canada. Is this an issue that your department is willing to look into? Because while we can harmonize and mutually recognize existing regulations, there are going to be many, many more regulations that will have to be developed in the years ahead. And we don't want to end up in a situation where we continue to have duplicative and inconsistent regulations across the country.
Again, thank you for the point. Really interesting idea and proposal. I will, though, say We've spoken a little bit earlier about the built-in review mechanism built into this legislation, and that is precisely because we recognized in drafting this legislation that there is a certain inevitability to the building up of these barriers, that they're not put in place by anyone who is acting maliciously or in bad faith. And so we think that, we really, I don't know, I'm going to use an agricultural metaphor here, we have to swath our crop here. We have to cut it down, but we're going to have to keep on doing that every few years because it's going to grow back up.
Thank you, Minister.